A lot has been happening since we last met. After spending so many months at the foot of Mount Sinai, since last Shabbat, the Israelites entering into the book of Numbers are finally on the move. They are finally marching towards the promised land. In fact, when we meet them, we're only 3 Torah portion into the book of Numbers, but when we meet them, they are already 2 years into their march, and they already are at the edge of the promised land. They are about to go in. God asked Moses to send 12 elders, one from each of the tribes, before they enter to scout the land. So those 12 elders among the tribes disguise themselves as spies and begin a 40-day and 40-night journey throughout the land of Canaan. They return after 40 days and 40 nights, and Moses gathers the whole nation, eager to hear the good news about what they discovered, what they saw in the promised land they're about to enter into. And at first, all 12 speak of the abundance to be found in that land, speak of the gorgeousness of its peaks and valleys, of its rivers and its streams, the abundance of produce to be found there. They actually carried 2 men on a pole, carried a cluster of grape that was as big as them, to give you an idea of the abundance in that land. They describe the land as flowing with milk and honey, a delight to all who enter. And as everybody was ready to pack their bags, 10 of the 12 said, "Wait a minute. It's true, what we all said is absolutely true, but there is something you need to know. This land is filled with giants. Giants who lived in fortified cities. Giants who are experts in the military arts. They have armies that are unsurmountable. They also are all kind of indigenous people. All throughout this land, everywhere we walked, we found different groups of people in the north, in the south, in the Negev desert, in the mountains, in the plains. Each area of the land had a different indigenous people. We are concerned that we are not of sizable power to face those mighty giant armies. That the land will devour us is the word that those spies, those 10 elders talk. That we will be faced with different indigenous people and we will not know how to be a part of them. We are not ready to enter. We should not enter. This will be a disaster. But 2 of them, Joshua and Caleb, said, "No, don't listen to them. Don't listen to them. We can do this. Have faith. The Holy One will prevail, will help us conquer this land, will defeat those armies of giants. Hearken to the voice of the One. Follow Moses and Aaron." But it was too late. The fear had spread through the whole nation. And as the people were about, in the Torah it says, were about to grab stones to throw at Moses, Aaron, Joshua, and Caleb, God intervened and said, "Enough. Enough of this lack of faith. Enough of this rebellious spirit of yours. You indeed are not ready. You are not ready. You will not enter this land. In fact, you will wander through the wilderness a year for each day that the spies walk through the land of Canaan." until the generation that was enslaved in Egypt passes away, and the new generation of born free people can raise to the consciousness from which you will be able to step into the promised land. And since they already had traveled for 2 years, God gave them a little discount and said, okay, 38 more years. That's not exactly how it happened, but this is how the great accountant decided. Most commentaries on this passage would look at those 10 elders and their negativity as a failure of faith. How dare they come back with such negative words about the promised land, about the project that Moses was leading them into. Most comments are disparaging of those 10. A few, obviously because this is rabbinic commentaries, a few obviously will take the other side and say, no, don't be too fast in judging them and condemning them. Maybe they were right. Maybe in fact, they saw something that the others didn't see. They saw something that in our urge to enter the land, we neglected to look at. And perhaps this is not a mistake that we are reading this Torah portion this weekend, the 4th of July weekend, because I think it speaks to our experience as Americans. We too, some 340 years ago, declared our independence from an army of giants. That was the most gigantic army on the face of the planet at that time, and we defeated them. That was a great success. We conquered our fears, rallied, and defeated that military giant that England was. What was less of a success is what followed. Our conquest of the land, our settling of the land, was much less of a success. Genocide is one of the words that often we use to describe what we did to those indigenous people that lived here as we displaced them, killed them, took their land to claim it our own, and decimated their numbers. Slavery is another word that can describe how we were able to build this nation at first, to create its economy, its structure. When we declared our independence and said the words, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. We define the word men in its narrowest possible sense. In fact, sometimes I think that the people who wrote the Declaration of Independence wrote it for themselves, because they really were the ones who needed it, who needed to affirm it. It only referred to men, not women, and it only referred to men who were white and who had English and Protestant lineage. Those were the men, free and equal. Now, perhaps that's what the 10 spies understood 3,000 years earlier. Perhaps they foreshadowed that we too were going to walk into that land and make the same mistakes. We too were going to walk into that land and create in our wake a disaster for the land and for the people who were there already. And that the land ultimately might devour us because of that. They perhaps saw that 2 years after receiving the Ten Commandments and the principles of spirituality that we barely started to uncover, we had not, you wouldn't have said that 3,000 years ago, but we had not downloaded its precepts. We had not integrated the meaning. We had not embraced the values, the ethics that flowed from this gift of Sinai. And if we were to enter into the land before being ready to be the full nation that we could be, we would wreak havoc to others and to ourselves. Perhaps that's what they saw. Perhaps that's what they said. They said, we can't enter here. And perhaps God, instead of punishing them as we have been taught to look at this passage, God was siding with them and said, yes, these guys are right. You are not ready. This generation will need to die in the wilderness for a new generation born free to enter into the promised land. I mean, look at us here in America today. We are still in the middle of our nation-building program. 340 years later, we are still doing it. We are not done. In fact, I don't know if you've been paying attention to what's going on in the politics of our country. We are in the middle of a major argument, a national argument about what it means, what is the essence of our national identity. I mean, if you listen, you will see that the main thrust in the back and forth between the two candidates running for president are in fact arguing that very point. There is a group of us Americans who are wanting that national identity to be a reflection of an evolving global consciousness. That we within the borders of our nation should be a mirror of a pluralistic world. That this word men in the Declaration of Independence should be written with a capital M, a universal men, as in mankind or humankind. That it should include men and women, but it also should include all different colors of skin, all different all different tastes of worship, all different religions, and no religion at all. That it should include our gay and lesbian, our transgender brothers and sisters. That this nation of ours should be a reflection of this universal, expanding consciousness that is our world. But there are millions of Americans who are very concerned with this rush towards universal consciousness, that are not comfortable with the other half of the nation and their push towards this pluralistic universal country, this mirror of the world, that are concerned, deeply concerned with losing the essence of what America was built upon, what America stood for, its values, its principles of old. That which had made and still is creating America as this great nation that so many around the world want to come to and live, including people from France. And they see perhaps this evolution going too fast, that we are not ready, that we might need perhaps another generation or two before we can really embrace this universal consciousness, this universal concepts. That it may be time to slow down. And we've seen just last week, really, happening in the UK, the vote to remove the United Kingdom from the EU, from the European Union, is what is happening on a global scale. The rise of a concern among nations that we are perhaps running too fast, headlong into this global thing that we don't understand yet. And the vote was to stop the bleeding, to close the borders, to not let those who speak a different language, who look differently than us, who have a different religion, flood our country. Because we were risking, and I'm speaking on behalf of the British people, at least the 52% who voted, they were concerned that the essence of their nation would be diluted, would be disappearing. And we can't deny those voices. Wherever we fall on the political spectrum, we have to be able to hear each other. We have to be able to understand where each side, even though I don't like the word side, but each individual person is coming from. We have to know each other's fears. We have to try our best to walk a mile in each other's shoes. Because the truth of the matter is, this is not just happening on the global scale or on a national scale for us here on this Independence Day weekend. This is happening for each of us individually. We too are wrestling with those two seemingly opposite directions. On the one hand, right? On the one hand, I have to do the best I can to be the fullest I, the fullest me as I can be. Because without that, then I'm not able to give the gift that I was born to give to this world. So I'm doing the best I can to nurture that inner self of mine, to grow that self of mine, to expand that self of mine. But on the other hand, I have a deep yearning to belong. I can't just be by myself in a vacuum. I belong to a family. I belong to a community. I belong to a nation. So we want to be individualistic. We want, and it's important to be independent. It is critical to be independent. Sometimes we need to be independent from bad relationships. Claim our independence from that. From bad work context. Like, we need to be our own person with healthy boundaries. And at the same time, it is critical for us to be members, part of a greater community, to yearn for something to work towards that is greater than ourselves. And we live in that paradox of the I versus the we. And we straddle both all the time. And we have to ask ourselves, we have to ask ourselves that question. What does it mean for my I to move beyond being a citizen of a nation? We've been accustomed to understanding ourselves as Americans, as French, as British. For hundreds of years, that's how we've defined ourselves, right? We have a passport. It tells us what family we belong to, right? But what does it mean as this is evolving beyond the borders, as we becoming transnational people. How do we define ourselves? What is our passport if there are no borders anymore? And it's not going to happen in 10 years or in 20 years. It's already here. I mean, though they're housed in the walls of our city, but we all interact with Facebook. We all interact with Starbucks, Nike, Boeing. Those are not anymore American entities. They spread across the planet. And we live and work in this global construct. So what does it mean for you? Who are you in that? How are we going to define ourselves in this new era? Or are we not ready for it? So if 3,000 years ago the count was 10-2, right? In England it was more like 7-5. We'll see in November where we fall between the different spies, between the different elders. But it is a question that is asked of us right now. And I don't know, you probably pay attention, but you know the banners, each candidate, so much about this question of national identity. On one side, and I'm not making any comments or preference, we need to keep our 501c3 intact. But on the one hand, I'm only talking about the slogan. One says, stronger together. Well, think about what that means. That word, together. That means that we are talking about a different national identity. Right? Stronger together. All of us. Wherever you come from, whatever you worship, whatever your color, whatever your background, together. But on the other side, and I'm only talking about the slogan, make America great again. Again means, hold on, slow down. Let's keep what we have here, what we've had, because that was great. Let's not risk diluting that. Let's not risk losing that. Let's keep this national identity of ours as it exists today and as it existed actually a few decades ago. You see that debate happening, and it's happening within all of us at the same time. So it'll be interesting for us to be involved in this process over the next few months and listen to that dialogue about redefining what it means to live in this country. Those are deep conversations happening, and oftentimes we only see the surface and the barking and the yelling, but underneath that is a real, deep, transformative conversation that is happening. So stay tuned. But you know what unites us? Wherever we fall on that, and I would suspect that all of us have a foot in both. All of us are divided. All of us are struggling and wrestling with all of it. But one thing unites us. Is one of the founding aspects, one of the founding energies of this country. The same principle that was with the Hebrews as they left Egypt 3,000 years ago, if that story was ever true. The principle under which God's self defined herself as God speaks the first commandment. God defined God's self as a force of freedom. And that force of freedom has been the cornerstone, the motivation, the engine that has pushed this country forward in the past 340 years and more. And you can't stop that force because it is built in each of us. We, day after day, seek to free ourselves from what keeps us stuck And as a nation, we work day after day to remove the obstacles that keep others and ourselves stuck, denied, repressed, oppressed. And we can't stop the march of freedom.